Well, time is important. You have to put the time in.
Yeah.
You have to. But it's the emotional care, it's the selfless emotional involvement, the sense of patience that we usually don't have to have much patience about ourselves.
He was the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob who made the whole world fall madly in love. That killer smile, those piercing eyes that set millions of hearts on fire in Pretty Woman. Richard Gere, the sex symbol who ruled the silver screen for decades. But at 76 years old, his once perfect life has collapsed into a devastating nightmare nobody saw coming. On February 18, 2023, in Nuevo Vallarta, Mexico, Richard Gere came face to face with death itself. Struck by savage pneumonia during a family getaway, he collapsed in the middle of the night. Hooked up to machines in a cold hospital room, his heart fading fast, he stared at the ceiling, thinking it was the end, while his young wife Alejandra wept hysterically in the hallway, and their two terrified little boys kept crying, "Daddy, Daddy, please come back." Just months later, in October 2024, he made the jaw-dropping choice to abandon Hollywood forever, walking away from fame, fortune, and everything he'd spent a lifetime building. Then, in November 2025, a dark family secret so horrifying exploded behind closed doors. A betrayal that ripped his marriage and family to shreds and left them all standing on the brink of total destruction. Tonight, we're exposing the raw, heartbreaking truth. Grab your tissues right now, because this story is about to shatter your heart. Chapter 1, the Oscar night that destroyed Richard Gere's career forever. He was at the absolute peak of his power. Richard Gere wasn't just a movie star in the early 1990s. He was the fantasy every woman whispered about and every man secretly envied. With his chiseled jaw, piercing blue eyes, and that effortless swagger, he had ruled Hollywood for over a decade. American Gigolo made him a sex symbol overnight. An officer and a gentleman turned him into a romantic legend. And then came Pretty Woman in 1990, the film that exploded his career into the stratosphere. At 43 years old, Richard Gere had it all. Millions in the bank, screaming fans outside every premiere, and a beautiful wife, Cindy Crawford, the supermodel whose face graced the cover of every magazine. Their marriage was tabloid gold, two of the most gorgeous people on the planet, walking red carpets hand in hand, looking like they had stepped out of a dream. Offers poured in daily. Studios begged him to sign on the dotted line. Life in Beverly Hills felt invincible. But everything changed on one single unforgettable night. It was March 29th, 1993. The 65th Academy Awards were underway at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in downtown Los Angeles. The historic theater glowed under blinding spotlights. Limousines lined the streets for blocks. Stars in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos posed for the cameras, while the entire world tuned in live. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and pure ambition. Richard Gere arrived on the red carpet looking every inch the king of Hollywood. Perfectly tailored black tuxedo, hair slicked back, that million-dollar smile flashing for the photographers. He waved to fans chanting his name. Cindy walked beside him, radiant in a sleek gown, squeezing his hand. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. Inside the auditorium, the show rolled on with its usual glamour. When the time came to present Best Art Direction, Richard Gere stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted in applause. Millions watched from living rooms across America and around the globe. He stood behind the podium, the golden Oscar statuettes gleaming behind him. The teleprompter rolled with the scripted words, but something inside him shifted. He glanced down, paused for a long heartbeat, and then pushed the script aside. The entire room went dead silent. Staring straight into the camera, his voice steady and burning with conviction, Richard Gere spoke words that would destroy his golden life.
Where we could all kind of send love and
and truth and a kind of sanity to Deng Xiaoping right now in Beijing, that he will take his troops and take the Chinese away from Tibet and allow these people to live as free, independent people again.
Gasps rippled through the audience like a shockwave. Some faces froze in horror. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few clapped nervously, but the majority sat stunned. Backstage, producers exchanged panicked glances. Security moved closer to the wings. Richard finished the presentation as if nothing had happened, handed off the award, and walked off stage. What followed was pure chaos. The moment he stepped into the green room, a powerful studio executive, someone who had just offered him a $50 million three-picture deal, stormed up to him, face red with fury. "What the hell was that, Richard? Do you have any idea what you just did?" The man's voice echoed off the walls. Other producers gathered, whispering furiously. One of them grabbed his arm and pulled him into a private corner. "China is watching this live. You just killed your career in front of the entire planet." Richard tried to explain his passion for Tibetan freedom, but the executive cut him off coldly. "Passion? This isn't passion. This is career suicide." Later that same night, back in his luxurious suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the phone started ringing at 11:47 p.m. Richard picked up, still in his tuxedo, Cindy sitting on the edge of the bed looking worried. It was the same studio head from earlier. His voice was ice cold and final. "You just destroyed your career, Richard. Congratulations. The deal is dead. Every major studio just got the memo. No one touches you now." Click. The line went dead. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. By sunrise on March 30th, 1993, the headlines were everywhere. "Gere's Oscar shock. Hollywood traitor," screamed the tabloids. Reporters camped outside their home. Anonymous calls flooded in, some praising him, but many threatening violence from pro-China groups. One caller left a message saying, "You just made yourself an enemy of the most powerful market on earth. Watch your back." Cindy broke down in tears that morning, begging him to apologize publicly. "This isn't just about you anymore," she sobbed. "It's about us, our future." Their marriage, once the envy of Hollywood, suddenly felt fragile under the weight of what he had done. Within 48 hours, the fallout became catastrophic. A major action film set to start shooting in June, worth $20 million to Richard, was canceled overnight. The director called personally, voice shaking. "The Chinese backers pulled out the second they saw your speech. They said they'll never work with you again." Another romantic lead role opposite a huge star vanished the same week. Studios that had been chasing him for months now sent polite but firm letters. "Due to recent events, we must regrettably pass." Doors slammed shut across town. Parties that once begged for his attendance now crossed his name off every guest list. The man who had been untouchable was suddenly radioactive. For the next 20 years, the Academy quietly kept him away from the stage. No invitations to present, no seats at the front. Hollywood had turned its back on its former golden boy. Richard Gere, once the ultimate sex symbol, was now labeled a pariah, a troublemaker, the guy who went too far for 1 minute of raw honesty. Offers dried up to a trickle. He watched younger actors take roles that should have been his. The fame, the fortune, the invincible life, it all began to crumble because of one sentence spoken from the heart on March 29, 1993. In that single moment of sincerity, the king of Hollywood became an outsider in the very kingdom that had made him a legend. And that was only the beginning of the long, painful fall that would haunt him for decades to come. Chapter 2, Shattered Marriages and the Heartbreak of Fatherhood at 69. The Oscar disaster of March 29, 1993, didn't just shatter Richard Gere's career. It cracked open the foundation of his personal life and set off a chain of heartbreaks that would haunt him for decades. The man who once seemed to have everything now watched his fairy tale marriages crumble one by one. each ending more painful than the last, until the greatest fear of all arrived, becoming a father again when time itself felt like his enemy. It started with Cindy Crawford, the supermodel who had been his perfect match on paper. They eloped on December 12, 1991, in a spontaneous Las Vegas ceremony, exchanging aluminum foil rings in a tiny chapel because they couldn't wait another day. For 4 glittering years, they were Hollywood's ultimate power couple. Paparazzi followed them everywhere, from red carpets in Los Angeles to quiet weekends at their Beverly Hills mansion. Richard, still riding high from Pretty Woman, called Cindy his anchor in the storm. She was only 25 when they married, he was 39. They laughed about the age gap, posed for magazine covers, and told the world their love was forever. But behind closed doors, the cracks had already begun. The relentless tabloid rumors, wild stories claiming their marriage was a publicity stunt, wore them both down. By late 1994, the arguments grew louder. On December 1st, 1994, they released a joint statement announcing their separation. The divorce was finalized in 1995, citing irreconcilable differences. No screaming fights in court, no public mudslinging, just a quiet, dignified end that still left Richard devastated. He later admitted in private circles that losing Cindy felt like losing the last piece of his invincible youth. For the first time, the sex symbol of the 90s was alone, watching the woman he loved walk away while his career continued its slow, painful slide. Years passed in a blur of smaller roles and quiet reflection. Then, in 2002, Richard found love again with actress Gere Lowell. They had known each other for years, but it wasn't until after his divorce from Cindy that romance blossomed. Their son, Homer, had already arrived in 1999, a beautiful boy who became the center of Richard's world. The couple married quietly that year, hoping for the stability Richard desperately craved. For over a decade, they lived a relatively private life in New York and Connecticut. Richard dove deeper into Buddhism, spending long hours meditating and supporting Tibetan causes. Gere, outgoing and social, sometimes struggled with his preference for solitude. The differences that once felt charming slowly turned into distance. In 2012, after 11 years of marriage, Gere filed for divorce. What followed was a brutal 4-year battle that dragged through the courts until its bitter end in October 2016. The custody fight over 15-year-old Homer became the most devastating chapter. In one particularly brutal hearing in early 2016, inside a sterile Manhattan courtroom on a cold February morning, the judge questioned Richard's ability to be a full-time father. Lawyers for Gere suggested his intense devotion to Buddhism and frequent travels for charity work made him unstable and too distracted for primary custody. Richard sat there in a simple, dark suit, hands trembling on the wooden table. The room was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the scratching of the court reporter's pen. When the judge pressed him on his schedule, Richard broke. Tears streamed down his face in front of the lawyers, the stenographer, and the handful of spectators. His voice cracked as he looked straight at the judge and said the words that would be whispered about in Hollywood for years. "I'd rather lose every penny I own, every role I have ever had, than lose my son. Homer is my life. Please, don't take him from me." The courtroom fell completely still. Even the opposing lawyers looked away. In the end, they reached a shared custody agreement, but the damage was done. The divorce was finalized on October 18, 2016. Richard walked out of the courthouse alone that gray afternoon, shoulders slumped, feeling like a failure as both a husband and a father. At 67 years old, he had lost another marriage and come dangerously close to losing the one person who still made him feel whole. But life somehow gave him one more chance. In 2018, Richard met Alejandra Silva, a Spanish publicist and activist 34 years his junior. They had known each other through mutual friends in the charity world, but their connection turned romantic after years of quiet friendship. On a warm April evening in 2018, they married in an intimate private ceremony at his sprawling estate in Pound Ridge, New York. No red carpet, no paparazzi. Just close friends, candlelight, and the soft sound of Spanish guitar under the stars. Alejandra wore a simple white gown. Richard looked at her with the kind of hope he hadn't felt in decades. For the first time since the Oscar fallout, he believed he could build something lasting. Then came the greatest joy and the deepest fear. In February 2019, at the age of 69, Richard became a father again. Their son Alexander was born in a New York hospital on a snowy winter morning. Richard held the tiny baby in his arms, tears in his eyes, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Just 9 months later, in April 2020, their second son James arrived. On paper, it looked like a fairy tale ending, but in the quiet hours of the night, in their new home in Madrid, after they relocated in late 2024, Richard would lie awake staring at the ceiling. He was now in his mid-70s. Alexander was learning to walk. James was taking his first steps, and the terrifying thought haunted him. Will I live long enough to see them grow up? Will I be here for their first day of school, their graduations, their weddings? He confided to close friends that every birthday candle he blew out carried the same silent prayer, not for more fame or money, but for more time. The man who had once commanded the world's attention now measured his life in school drop-offs and bedtime stories, terrified that time would steal this final chapter the way it had stolen so many before. 2 divorces, 2 heartbreaks, and the raw terror of late fatherhood had stripped Richard Gere of every illusion. The golden boy of Hollywood had become a man confronting the cruel math of age and love. He had lost wives, nearly lost a son, and now feared losing the future with the 2 little boys who called him daddy. And yet, the hardest chapters were still to come. Chapter 3, the terrifying night he almost died in Mexico. But even as Richard Gere tried to rebuild his life with Alejandra and their young sons, fate had one more brutal test waiting for him, a night that would bring him face to face with death itself. It was supposed to be a celebration. In mid-February 2023, the family had flown to their private villa in Nuevo Vallarta, Mexico, to mark Alejandra Silva's 40th birthday on February 16th. The oceanfront home was filled with laughter, candlelight, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Alexander, who had just turned 4, and James, who was 3, ran around the tiled floors chasing each other, while Richard, now 73, watched with the kind of quiet joy he had fought so hard to earn after 2 painful divorces. Alejandra looked radiant in a simple white sundress, blowing out candles on a cake decorated with fresh tropical flowers. For once, life felt complete. No red carpets, no cameras, just the 4 of them together under the warm Mexican sun. But something had been wrong for weeks. Richard had been coughing since late January. At first, it was just an irritating dry hack he blamed on the New York winter they had left behind. By the time they landed in Mexico, the cough had turned deep and rattling, keeping him awake at night. He tried to hide it from the children, popping cough drops and sipping tea, telling Alejandra it was nothing. "I'm fine, love. This is your birthday trip," he kept saying with that familiar, gentle smile. For 3 full weeks, the cough grew worse, draining his energy until even walking along the beach left him breathless. Still, he pushed through, determined not to ruin the celebration. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 2:07 a.m. on February 18th, 2023. The villa was dark and silent, except for the distant roar of the Pacific. Richard suddenly sat bolt upright in bed, gasping for air. His chest felt like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. Sweat poured down his face as he clutched at his ribs, each breath a sharp, wheezing struggle. Alejandra woke instantly to the sound of his desperate choking. "Richard, Richard, what's happening?" she cried, switching on the lamp. His lips were turning blue. He could barely speak. Can't breathe, was all he managed before collapsing back against the pillows. Panic exploded through the house. Alejandra dialed emergency services with shaking hands while trying to keep the terrified children calm. Alexander and James, still in their pajamas, stood in the doorway crying, not understanding why Daddy was lying there struggling for every breath. "Daddy, Daddy, wake up," little Alexander kept repeating, his small voice breaking. Within minutes, paramedics from the private hospital in Nuevo Vallarta arrived and rushed Richard into an ambulance. The ride through the dark coastal roads felt endless. Alejandra sat beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face as the sirens screamed into the night. At the hospital, the diagnosis hit like a hammer. Doctors immediately ran chest x-rays and blood tests. Severe bacterial pneumonia had taken over both lungs. Infection had spread rapidly, filling the air sacs with fluid and pus. Richard's oxygen levels were plummeting dangerously low. "We're looking at acute respiratory failure," the lead doctor told Alejandra in a quiet hallway at 3:15 a.m. "He's on the edge. We may need to intubate and put him on a ventilator within the hour if he doesn't stabilize." The words landed like a death sentence. Alejandra collapsed against the wall outside the ICU, sobbing uncontrollably, while the two little boys clutched her legs, still asking why Daddy wasn't coming home. Inside the sterile room, hooked up to monitors and an oxygen mask, Richard lay fighting for his life. The beeping machines and the harsh fluorescent lights above him blurred together. In those terrifying hours, he believed it was the end. His mind drifted back over everything: the Oscar speech that cost him his career, the divorces that nearly broke him, the two small boys who had just started calling him Daddy again after so many years of waiting. He motioned weakly for a nurse and, in a raspy whisper, asked for paper and a pen. No one outside that room knew it, but in the middle of that desperate night, Richard Gere wrote his final will and testament, letters to each of his sons, instructions for Alejandra, and a quiet goodbye to the life he thought was slipping away. "If I don't make it," he told the nurse through the mask, "tell my wife I loved her more than anything." Hours passed in agonizing suspense. Alejandra paced the corridor, praying in Spanish and English, while the children eventually fell asleep on a couch in the waiting area, exhausted from crying. Doctors pumped him full of powerful intravenous antibiotics and steroids, fighting to bring down the raging infection. At one point, his heart rate spiked dangerously as his body struggled to get enough oxygen. The doctor stepped out again and told Alejandra, "We're doing everything we can, but he's still critical. The next few hours will decide." By dawn on February 19th, a fragile turning point came. Richard's oxygen levels slowly began to climb. The fever that had burned through him for days finally started to break. He remained in the hospital for observation, but the immediate threat of intubation and death had passed. When he finally opened his eyes later that morning and saw Alejandra's tear-streaked face, he squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'm still here. I'm not leaving you yet." The brush with death in that small Mexican hospital on February 18th, 2023, changed Richard forever. The man who had once commanded Hollywood stages now realized how fragile every extra day truly was. He had stared into the abyss and come back, but the fear of leaving his young sons fatherless and his wife a widow would linger long after the antibiotics did their work. And even though he survived that night, the hardest emotional storms were still gathering on the horizon. Chapter 4: Walking Away from Hollywood Forever, the Ultimate Sacrifice. But even after surviving the terrifying brush with death in that Mexican hospital on February 18th, 2023, Richard Gere still had one final soul-crushing storm to face, a secret so painful it nearly destroyed the only family he had left. By November 2025, the 76-year-old actor had settled into a quieter life in Madrid. He had poured his remaining energy into a deeply personal documentary titled What Nobody Wants to See, a film about the hidden struggles of aging Hollywood legends and the price of speaking truth to power. The world premiere was scheduled for November 15th, 2025, at a small but elegant theater in the heart of Madrid's Salamanca district. It was supposed to be a quiet triumph, a chance for Richard to close one chapter and begin another. The red carpet that night was nothing like the glittering spectacles of his youth. Only a handful of photographers showed up, and the crowd was modest, mostly local journalists and a few curious passers-by. Richard stepped out of the black SUV in a simple dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed, Alejandra on his arm, looking elegant in a flowing black gown. Alexander, now 6, and James, 5, held their parents' hands, wide-eyed at the flashing cameras. But the shocking truth hit Richard like a punch to the chest. Almost no one recognized him. A group of young Spanish fans in their 20s walked right past, one whispering loudly, "Who's the old American guy with the kids?" Another snapped a quick photo only because of Alejandra's beauty. The man who once stopped traffic on Hollywood Boulevard now blended into the background, just another elderly gentleman at a small film event. The sex symbol, who had once commanded millions of fans, had become invisible in his own lifetime. Inside the theater, the documentary played to respectful applause. Richard sat in the front row, holding Alejandra's hand tightly, but his mind was elsewhere. He could feel the tension radiating from his wife. After the screening and a brief Q&A, the family returned to their private suite at the luxurious Four Seasons Hotel in Madrid. The boys were tucked into bed in the adjoining room, exhausted from the evening. That was when the dam finally broke. Alejandra closed the heavy wooden door, leaned against it, and began to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Richard froze, his heart pounding. "Mi amor, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching for her. She pulled away at first, then collapsed onto the velvet sofa, tears streaming down her face. In a voice raw with years of unspoken pain, she looked him straight in the eyes and delivered the secret she had carried for over a year. "Last year in 2024, I almost left you, Richard. I had the divorce papers drawn up in secret. I was going to file in Madrid and take the boys back to Spain full-time. You were still obsessed with Hollywood, calling old agents at midnight, talking about one last comeback, obsessing over roles you would never get because of that damn Oscar speech from 1993. You kept saying the industry owed you. Meanwhile, I was raising our sons alone while you stared at old movie posters and ignored us. I couldn't watch you destroy what we built." Richard's face went pale. The room felt like it was closing in, but the revelations were not over. Alejandra continued, her voice breaking. "And the money? God, the money. To keep me from leaving, you secretly sold the last big Connecticut property for $8.2 million in cash. The same house you fought so hard to keep after the divorce with Gere. You transferred almost everything into my name so the boys would be protected if I walked away. We were this close to losing the Madrid villa too. Lawyers said the legal fees from a contested divorce would have wiped out half our remaining assets. You nearly bankrupted us emotionally and financially just to chase a ghost from your past." The words hung heavy in the air. Richard Gere, the man who had survived pneumonia, 2 divorces, and decades of Hollywood exile, dropped to his knees right there on the marble floor of the luxury suite. His 76-year-old joints ached, but he didn't care. Tears filled his eyes as he looked up at his wife, then glanced toward the half-open door where his 2 little boys slept peacefully. His voice cracked with raw desperation. "I'm so sorry, Alejandra. I was a fool. I let the past poison everything I have right now. I almost lost you. I almost lost our family. I'd rather lose every last dollar, every piece of property, every memory of Hollywood than spend one more night without you and the boys. I swear to you and to them, I will never let them cry because of me again. I'm not a movie star anymore. I'm just their father and your husband. That's all I want to be." Alejandra stared at him for a long moment, then slid off the sofa and wrapped her arms around him. They knelt together on the floor, crying quietly as the city lights of Madrid glowed through the tall windows. In that hotel suite on the night of November 15th, 2025, Richard Gere finally let go of the last fragments of his old life. The financial sacrifices, the near loss of everything he owned, and the fear of losing his young family had stripped him bare. Later that night, as the boys stirred and wandered and sleepy-eyed, Richard pulled them into his arms. The camera would have captured a perfect final image. The 76-year-old Richard Gere, eyes red and swollen, holding his two small sons tightly against his chest, while Alejandra watched with quiet hope. He was no longer the untouchable sex symbol. He was simply an old man fighting with everything he had left to keep his family together. At 76, Richard Gere had lost fame, fortune, and nearly everything the world once envied. But in that moment on his knees in a Madrid hotel room, he finally understood what mattered most, and he was determined not to lose it. And with that painful but honest confession, the longest and hardest chapter of his life finally began to close. Richard Gere has lost so much: the glittering fame, the multi-million-dollar deals, the adoration of millions who once called him the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob. He walked away from it all: the red carpets, the spotlight, the life he spent decades building. And yet, through every heartbreak and every near collapse, one thing remained untouched: his family. In the end, after surviving death in a Mexican hospital, after 2 painful divorces, after nearly losing everything he owned to keep his marriage alive, Richard Gere stands as proof that true wealth isn't measured in Oscars or box office numbers. It's measured in the small arms of 2 little boys who still call him Daddy, and the love of a wife who chose to stay. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real in a world full of fake highlight reels, then do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we're bringing you the raw, untold stories of the legends who gave everything and what happened when the lights finally went out. Drop a comment below and tell me honestly, do you think Richard Gere is truly happy today? Or is he still carrying the weight of everything he sacrificed? And if you want to know which Hollywood icon will be next to face their own breaking point, make sure you're subscribed. The next video is coming soon. Thank you for watching until the very end. Take a second, wipe those tears, and remember that even the biggest stars are just human beings searching for the same thing we all are: someone to hold when the world walks away. We'll see you in the next story.